So moving on to our second question of the evening, we're going to go to Frank in Southgate. And Frank is a landlord who says, I have a tenant in my home and I am selling that home, which is supposed to close in mid-June. The buyers put in the agreement that I had to have my tenant out within 2 weeks prior to closing. My tenant has just told me, though, that they are not leaving. They have nowhere to go. Now what? Is what Frank
I like how he finished that one.
Now what?
Wow. Wow. Well, let's pretend it's not COVID-19 season, okay? For 1
Okay.
second, okay? Just in
No more
general,
crowd.
right?
Yep.
Whenever you have a tenant and you're selling a piece of property, there's always a variable that nobody can control. I mean, even if you have a good tenant and somebody you have a good relationship with, if the property sale is contingent upon that tenant leaving, you just only hope that that tenant will abide by their agreement that they're going to leave. Okay. So if I were he's the seller. So if I were the seller's real estate agent, I wouldn't make the transaction, quote, contingent upon the tenant being out of the home. Okay. Because if the tenant's not out, that whole contract falls apart.
Right.
You can write that language a little bit differently, such as if the tenant is not out of the property, the seller will begin an eviction proceeding and pay for the eviction proceeding. That's a better way to do it so that you don't lose your deal. If that's really what the PA says. I mean, he's paraphrasing, I know whatever it is he has, but we'd have to see the contract.
Yep.
But again, the tenant's in there. When you have a tenant, it's hard enough to sell a home with a tenant and a piece of property, right? To list a home and show a home while you have a tenant there, that's a special skill unto itself. You have to have a decent tenant, okay? Because sometimes tenants won't let you in. They'll make it very difficult for the realtor to get in the property. That's number one. Number two, I think that the now what is, next steps are to wait and see. If the tenant is truly not going to leave, you can do a couple of things. You can bring in action. This is not in light of the COVID situation. This is just in general. Okay. Yeah. You'll have to bring an action to evict them, and you may have to pay. You may have to say to the seller, "Look, I'm willing to close. I'm still going to close, but look, we got the tenant in there until the tenant's out. We'll deal with a per diem. I'll pay you a per diem amount of money. Consider me a holdover seller until this tenant's out." That's one of the things that you can do. Another thing you can do is sweeten the deal, and just basically say to the tenant, "Look, I need you out by X date, and in exchange for you leaving, I will give you X amount," almost like a cash for keys.
Sure. Okay.
Right? There's no, I've had this question, especially the past couple of years, where people are like moving, property that prior to 2014, when the market was bad, now everybody wants to sell their property. Now they got tenants in the property that they want out. And so this question happens at least once, twice a week. I got a tenant, what do I do? Well, those are the choices. The third one is you hope that like I said, the tenant abides by the lease and is a good tenant. Otherwise you're gonna have to evict them.
So that is what they can do without the restrictions from coronavirus. Yeah. What can Frank do right now with this current situation, however?
Nothing. Well, you can at least send them a notice for the eviction, but you won't be able to. We represent a lot of real estate investors from all over the world, all over the country, and I'm getting calls because every state's handling their COVID shutdown differently. And some of my clients are calling from other states where they don't have lockdown. They're like, "Wait a minute, it's been since March and I still can't get that tenant out." And right. I'm like, "No, can't do anything until June 12th, after June 12th. So, landlords have been patient. I'd rather not comment on what's going on out there between landlords and tenants and rent forgiveness and all that. That's a whole different issue. But
sure.
The landlord cannot do anything right now in Michigan. So to be fair, if I were in this gentleman's shoes, I'd be really nice to my tenant and give him a little money to move on, because we don't know if that COVID restrictions are going to be, extended, and you won't be able
Hmm.
to get I didn't, lady guy, I have no idea who it was, but
Sure.
this tenant out, it could be for months. Who knows? That's, I do want to make a quick comment, as I always, like on the aside. You know, I had a transaction, it wasn't completely like this, but the parties had to like come to a new understanding about a closing date. And I just want to tell your real estate investors, the people who are watching and people interested in real estate investing, this just happened and it was kind of crazy. And of course, the the seller did not come to me beforehand, only after.
Okay.
So what happened was the closing date got changed. There was an issue with regards to the funding. Instead of the real estate agent, which is a sales agent, okay, they shouldn't be drafting documents. Okay? It's not their business. Instead of them just amending the date of the purchase agreement, the closing and the purchase agreement. So let's say it's supposed to close, I don't know, May 1st, and they changed it and now it's supposed to close May 30th. The agents recreated a new purchase agreement.
Okay.
Now, what they failed to do was they forgot to cross out the inspection period
Uh-huh.
on the new purchase agreement. And this allowed the seller to wiggle out of the purchase agreement, the buyer to wiggle out of the
Hmm.
purchase agreement, because they had a new inspection period starting from the date of the new purchase agreement. Get an addendum. They should have done an addendum.
Yep.
And it just, I'm just sharing that with everybody because it just happened.
Hmm.
Um, there was a timing issue, and believe it or not, even though the party tried to wiggle out, they couldn't, because I was, ERISA selling them on us, we were involved. So, but it did create a lot of problems for at least 3 to 4 days for everybody, because the minute it was signed, the buyer came in and said, you know what, I'm not happy with the inspection, and therefore I don't want to proceed.
Isn't that something?
The problem, there was no, have you ever heard of the word consideration?
Right. No new EMD.
Right, there was no new consideration.
Hmm.
So that's how we were able to kind of
I
get it back on
gotcha.
track. Yeah.
I gotcha. All right.
All right.
Yeah, no, that is a good tidbit. So for investors that are newer, when Frank, the person who asked this question, used the phrase "the buyers put in the agreement," what Frank is referring to is the purchase agreement. So I actually have a lot of questions, David, believe it or not, people ask me just a very basic question about purchase agreements and literally what are they. And so
Mhm.
what David comments on to fellow investors who might be watching when he talks about addendums, amendments to the purchase agreement, you can make several, and it's just kind of like you're stapling it onto the back, sort of, in such a way
Right,
of making
right.
changes. But the original document stands, like in the whole thing, it stands. But whatever little changes, I have an addendum to a purchase agreement pretty much every time we pursue something, and so I wouldn't have even thought to rewrite the purchase agreement. But that's a good point, because people that don't know, they might think, oh, we need a new one. There are changes. We need to draft a new document. So yeah, that's good to know.
We went down a rabbit hole. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah,
I mean, we're here, right? I mean,
sure.
okay. When you do your addendums,
Hmm.
and let's say you have several changes, you need to always reference, not only with the next addendum, you
Hmm.
have to say this is addendum number 2 or addendum number
Okay.
3. Call it an amendment to the purchase agreement, or addendum to the
Hmm.
purchase agreement. This is the amendment to the purchase agreement dated X, but it's number 2 amendment. And you got to be real careful, because, and we've had a lot of, again, it's not seasoned real estate agents, because they pretty much get it. And it's
Yeah.
probably, but you're writing contracts, you're affecting and modifying contracts. And when you do that, you may overwrite something that was in another amendment that you weren't aware of. And there's so many different things that can happen. So you have to be really clear with your intentions in the amendments. People
Hmm.
treat purchase agreements and real estate documents like it's candy because it's easy to get online
Yep.
and they can download it. I'm sorry we spent so much time on this one area, but again, it's the gift that keeps on giving, Blair. And
Hmm.
so I would rather people be protected up front because it's hard when people are stressed and they didn't do it right the first time. Then you have to hold their hand through the process.
Yep.
And while I know we'll get you through it, it's still difficult even for us, you
Hmm.
know?
Yep. No, absolutely. No, there's a lot of red flags that popped up in that question. Other rabbit holes that people, would go down themselves as well. So we just covered all the areas for everybody out there.
Hmm.
No one is left wondering now.
Right.